Hey everybody, how are you today? Been good stuff going on. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for being here. Great, okay, so I am the queen of long titles, but when Craig said hyphen was the concept, the first thing I thought of was female actresses I knew who also wrote their own material, and how powerful it is to create the material that you're going to present, and how much more authentic you can be. So then I started thinking, who do I know? And the list got longer and longer. So I'm going to kind of introduce you to people that maybe you know they do their own writing, maybe you don't. And it's also I liked looking through all their work and trying to figure out what it was they felt they needed to bring to the piece that they weren't getting from someone else. So that's why it's when women write what they say so much more. So that's what we're going to do today. Most people have seen me before, but I work for Stevens College, which is in Missouri. We had SRN 2023 there a couple years ago. But our program is low residency, so people come to Los Angeles, where all of our teachers live, because we're all in the Writers Guild, and they come for a couple weeks a year, and then they go home and work, which is also very conducive to getting women who want to understand, can they be good at this business without moving their entire family across country to live in Los Angeles. So that's what we're all about. This is our mantra. You need to write so that we can reach more people with our stories and represent ourselves more authentically. So that's always been very happy to me. I came into academia from television, so I wrote on these TV shows. Funny enough, Eric Roberts was mentioned in the last session, and he was in one of my episodes of Touched by an Angel. I was like, wait, Eric, what's he doing there? So it's an interesting world. It's interesting to bring the professional experiences into an academic setting and try to give the students both the quality of how they should do it and how it really works in the real world. And then I also am the book editor for the Journal of Screenwriting. So if you ever want to write reviews for the journal, please let me know, because we always need people. And then I've done a bunch of books. Mostly very excited. This is the one we'll be launching at the event tomorrow. Yeah, exactly. That I did with Rose, who's speaking after me. So we're very excited. Again, it was raising women's voices and women who have written pieces that were activists and helped them spread a message they felt was necessary. So this all kind of thematically goes together. So again, when I thought about hyphenates, look, this is not a female, but this is the first hyphenate actor that I knew as a child who wrote his own material. And that was like a big deal back in the day. Really, he did that? And in interviews, he would say he did it because he wasn't seeing anybody represent his culture, Italian American culture. And I'm Sicilian American, so it meant a lot to us as kids to see Rocky, right? He's not a girl, though. These guys, we knew, had written their own material in order to get someone to pay attention to them as actors, and it did very well for them, don't we think? It was a very successful idea, and they will come back later in this presentation, so I had to add them here. But this is the first female that I realized wrote her own material. And when I have my students come to watch a series of movies, they do not know that she wrote the adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. To me, that is the most obvious thing to know about this movie. They do not know that. They think she merely starred in it. And it kills me that they don't understand that she received both the Oscar and the Golden Globe for doing it. So what did she do that was different in being a female who wrote this character that she was going to play? Yeah, exactly. It's true. She took the hunting scenes out of it because she didn't want to deal with killing animals, right? And these appear in the actual Austen text. And she added, and she was told by the studio people that having Willoughby carry her up the hill was dumb and girly. And she went, yeah, it's a girl thing. We're keeping it, right? Because this is a moment that she knew a female audience would revel in. Likewise, this does not appear in the film, but she wrote that they had a kissing scene so they could film it, and she yet never made the final edit. But as the person in charge of what the character would do, she made sure her character did the things that she wanted her to do. And I think that's really quite fun and a really good example. And people don't realize she also adapted Nanny McPhee, and she has something like 14 writing credits to her name. Again, most people think of her as the actress. I have this YouTube thing at the bottom simply because if you see the second slide, she gave the best acceptance speech for adapting this piece because she did it in the voice of Jane Austen. And what would Jane Austen make of an event like the Golden Globes? And it is the funniest thing to watch. So I highly recommend you find it on YouTube because she's adorable. But that's another example of some brilliant writing, because how many of these speeches are boring? And she made sure people would focus on her and understand the work that she had done. So I think that was my first example, and I make sure my students know all about her work. But she's not, the first. Actually, in the early days of Hollywood, lots of women wrote for the films they then starred in, because it was the Wild West and people were doing all the work they could possibly do. They were editing, they were writing music. So we have Jeannie McPherson, who's doing The Tarantula. She decided she hated acting, so she went and just did writing full time. People don't realize Mary Pickford wrote many of the early movies that she was in, till she tied up with Frances Marion, who was such a screenwriter. And then Jean Gontier was one of the earliest of female actresses and writers and producers. So women did a lot of this stuff in the early days. And then as we say, we get into that part where films became a business and middle men became the people who decided what got done, and everything became a category. So suddenly you were just an actress and just a writer and we pulled away from this sort of auteur world where they did a little bit of everything. I always think it's important to mention TV allowed that a little more when TV's invented, and so Gertrude Berg was actually considered the second most important woman in the United States behind Mrs. Roosevelt. And that was a big step. But a lot of people don't know her today because, of course, early television was erased. We didn't keep it. Lucy's the first show that put itself on film, so that we've had it forever. But Gertrude Berg wrote all of the radio shows and then all of the television shows when she brought her Rosenberg family into television. We also lose her in the history of television and in screenwriting because but the gentleman who played her husband, Philip Loeb, was blacklisted. And she insisted on not firing him, and so the network just canceled her show. So again, disappeared from the world and from a lot of what we study. But the fact that she brought a Jewish family into American homes at a time when that was still considered strange was amazing. And she did it for many, many years. So, but I want to move into more of the, if you will, modern day, although the 70s don't strike anyone as modern anymore. But we do tend to forget that Streisand did a lot of writing because she couldn't find characters that she felt were honest and true to her, right? So this, of course, was the second remake of A Star is Born. And while Joan Didion and her husband, John Gregory Dunn, were the writers, she's also credited because she did a lot of rewriting to the material to make it suit her. We know that there are writers in Hollywood today who are actor pass writers. And it just means if we're going to send this script to Tom Cruise, the person who sounds like Tom Cruise as a writer will do a pass so the main character sounds like Tom. If he turns down the movie, they pass it on to someone who does the Harrison Ford rewrite and all of that. So basically, Streisand did the Streisand rewrite. And it is a job of screenwriting that people don't really credit. So, of course, Joan and John did this adaptation, but she did so much. Particularly, she insisted that in their wedding scene, they would drop the word obey, which was not being done largely in this period, right? This later became a thing. I did that, and my mother thought everybody would hate me for it. Too bad. But this was a big deal, and it showcased the idea to young women that you could change those vows if you wanted to. Right? That's a big thing that she added. She also insisted that the man in the piece wear a white tuxedo. If she had to be white and pure and virginal, so did he. Right? And that's a new thing that she added from a female perspective. And she also refused to simply take his name. She hyphenated the names of the two characters at the end. And that was a big deal. So she brought a lot as a writer to the remake of this film. As we know, she wrote Yentl from scratch, including all the music. And then she co-wrote the adaptation of The Prince of Tides. So she recognized that she needed to be in charge. So much I dislike the fact that people say, oh, that's because she's a control freak. We don't say that about half the guys who do that. No, we never say, oh, no, he's such a control freak. No, he's just smart and doing a good job. She's smart and doing a good job to make sure her character is being protected, right? And this was, early on, I kind of knew this too, long before I knew Emma Thompson. But I forgot, because we forget. Anyway, then we think about Neovardalis, who started this piece, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which has now had 3 sequels. The most recent one came out a couple years ago. It was a stage play of her just talking about her Greek family, and lucky enough, Rita Wilson, who's married to Tom Hanks and is Greek, saw the stage play and said, this should be a movie. And it became such an amazingly popular movie. And she wrote it because she wanted to showcase what women were like in her culture, in her family culture. And I think that's why the piece resonated with so many other. I mean, this could be My Big Fat Sicilian Wedding, name any culture that was an immigrant culture. That's why it resonated with so many people. And that all came from Nia's writing, right? She made it as real as she could be. She also wanted to make sure that there were better female characters being presented, right? That there are not just the good girls and the bad girls and the hookers and the Madonnas. That these women can be three-dimensional and very interesting, and they can be the mothers in a family. And they don't have to be the evil in-law who's so mean to the new, whoever the daughter has married. In this case, she was making sure we saw the support that women bring through their families. And that's probably one of the things I would say makes the piece so timeless, that it continues to be seen over and over again. And I do think it's very important to recognize we have to hire each other. She thought about writing roles for women she knew who deserved to be in movies, who weren't being in movies anymore because they'd passed the age where they were wanted, if you want to say it in the polite way, right? So I think it's really amazing what she's done. She also talked about how she then, in this third sequel, recognized as a mother, she had never thought about life through a mother's eyes. So every sequel presented her and presented the women in the piece at the different stages in a woman's life. And none of them were, oh my God, I'm so fat, I hate life, it's terrible. They all were like, oh, this is a new thing happening to me. I want to show other women that this is a good, happy, expressive event. So I think that's really cool. And then she talks about what we don't talk about a lot in the United States, which is that the elders in a family need to be respected. They're not the dumb jokes and they're stupid and they can't run technology and whatever that is. That they're the people, and so when she and her husband then become the elders and they're taking care of the parents we've watched, that stage is something we don't recognize often because family movies are not considered, oh, there's not big explosions and Harrison Ford isn't, standing there really being gorgeous and running the world. But this is real life. And women want to see stories about their real world. So I think that's obviously what she brought to it. Tina Fey, years on SNL, finally decides I have to do something. Now, in her early days as a head writer on SNL, she talks about the fact that she still was letting the male executives tell her what was and wasn't acceptable. And in this case, they were doing a piece with Sylvester Stallone. Look, there's a theme going on here. And his wife was going to be in the piece. And she wanted one of the female comics on the show to play his wife, someone who was herself of Sicilian background. And the male executive said, no, it'd be funnier if a guy in drag does it. And she says that if she had been in the job longer, she would have fought back at that longer and given the female the job and not made the wife a stupid character in drag. Right? So she had to learn her own power, but when she did, she wielded it pretty well. Obviously, she created 30 Rock, which was a big deal for her, and she then was in charge of who she got to hire. So suddenly becoming the writer, the actress, to make sure the character was something she wanted, to make sure the end of the piece wasn't, and she gets married to the lead guy. That wasn't, it was look at how she grows in her career, which was Tina Fey's story. So she just put it on her fictional character. And I think that really, really is quite fun. She also then returned to SNL to do guesting when Sarah Palin was running for vice president. And she got into this sketch, and being able to write it herself, she made sure that what it was about was, even though we don't have to get political about it, you could decide which of those ladies you liked. But both of the ladies are not catfighting each other in this sketch. They're arguing about how sexism has gotten in the way of the work they're trying to do. And that was happening to both of them, no matter which side of the political bend you were on. That was wrong, because they weren't being judged for the talent they brought. Some didn't bring, but anyway, they were being treated in sex ways. And so I thought that was really interesting, that's why she came back to do it. Not because it would be funny or she needed to be on SNL. She had a message that she knew she could put into that character, which I thought was great. Lena Waithe was on a show called Masters of None. She was a comic and she knew Aziz Ansari. He convinced her to write an episode of the show about her own life. She was telling the story of how she came out to her mother and how it was not very acceptable in an African-American family to be gay. And her mother was immediately accepting of it. And that is not the typical story you see. You typically see, oh no, and everybody hates it, it's terrible, you can't do that. So he asked her to write it, and she did. And she ended up becoming, well, first of all, I like the fact that she told the story from the mother's point of view and showed that the mother was the hero of the story in that she was obviously accepting and loving of her child and not using this as a reason to be against her. And again, that was the typical story that you would see. And this is a very nice, comfortable coming out story because it was her own story in that way. So Lena was the first black woman to win a comedy writing Emmy. And this is only, I'm going to say 10 years ago now. I should have put the date up there. It seemed we went a long way before an African-American woman won an Emmy for writing. But she also talked about how for her, this was her chance to give the more nuanced perspective of who she was in the world. And it got her an Emmy, and now she's writing movies, and she's done really well from this moment of writing her own character in a realistic way. Right? I think that's pretty beautiful. Most people maybe have seen Bridesmaids, same thing. Kristen Wiig talked about why she wanted to work on it, what she was trying to do, and what she was trying to do was show women being funny without being the butt of jokes that men told. How are women funny when they're alone together? What are they bringing into community that makes it important for them to be with each other? And yes, there's some, you know, in my opinion, some over-the-top stuff. But we let guys have that kind of comedy all the time. And they wanted to have their opportunity to go a little bit crazy with the comedy. Most people here have known Michael Cole. She started with chewing gum, which was I wouldn't say funner, but an interesting look at her life. And what happened was she herself was then raped. And so she created I May Destroy You, which was to document her own growth out of that situation to make sure it wasn't the only defining way people spoke of her. And that was amazingly brave to spend all that time dealing with that. And in Chewing Gum, she was just trying to do kind of a fun character who, this is who I really am, and as a black woman, I can be who I want to be, and I have these goals. And so she was a really fun, I guess is a fair word, right? She wanted to show her version of what a black woman could be. Then she has this terrible experience, and she decides, I'm going to live through this trauma so other women can see this and realize they can live through it too. It is not the ending of my story. It's something I will move from, and I'm going to show other people how to do that. And I thought that was really amazingly brave and not something that we often see. So obviously it brought her to big attention. The ability to be completely vulnerable is what a writer has to do, but often we have to do it often females have to do it in some other person's voice. So to do it in her own voice was an amazing achievement, I think, for her. All right, then Issa Rae, similarly, couldn't get Hollywood people to buy her stuff. So she went directly to the internet. So we now moved into that world where there weren't as many gatekeepers. It was her own time, her own talent, her own money to put out The Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl. But by doing that on her own, she gained the attention of the gatekeepers who wouldn't let her in the door before, who suddenly went, you have an audience. We want the money your audience will bring us. How about you do that for us? And so the show became Insecure on HBO. That's an amazing achievement for a performer who writes her own work and makes sure she got it out there in the world so she could prove the value of it, because the gatekeepers did not think that it had any value. And of course, she ends up in Barbie, for heaven's sakes, as the president. So she definitely jump-started her career in that fashion. I think it's really interesting. She talks about how hard it is to see a three-dimensional black woman on television and why that was something she was going to bring to the table the best way that she could. And it was extremely successful all the way through. In this case, she talks about how the characters don't have to be perfect, and they don't have to be one stereotype that is, this is what everyone will achieve. They have that three-dimensionality. It sounds silly to have to keep saying, making people complete, but people were not seeing themselves as fully complete characters. They had to bring their own history to it, and I think that's really, really cool. Mindy Kaling, amazing and fun. Started out in The Office, did a little bit of writing, because she'd been a comedy writer, did a little bit of directing on The Office. People don't realize she did that. And then if you work through here, created Never Have I Ever. Of course, she did the Mindy Project first. And then Late Night, bringing Emma Thompson back into the story, was her writing her story of being on a comedy writing room with a bunch of men who didn't want to hear what she had to say, and how she had to work through to get her ideas forward. And then she created a movie all about that, which I think is cool. I have to just be proud for a moment. I put up Hannah Khan Carries On because one of the graduates of our program was hired to be the woman who adapts that into a movie for Mindy Kaling. So I'm very excited for her, and I'm very excited that she's connected to a woman with so much power in Hollywood who brought it to herself by writing the characters she wanted to see portrayed. That, to me, is where the power is. This is one of the things she said, the only way she's gotten anywhere, because you have to take your destiny into your own hands. Other people weren't going to give it to you. You had to make it happen. And she did. And she did it by, I told you that Matt and Ben would come back. In college, when she first moved to New York, she and her roommate created a stage play where they pretended to be Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. And it was, yeah, seriously, the two of them dressed in male drag and were them pretending they were inventing the movie. And what was it like for these two white boys to make this movie and sort of go on the journey they went on to become so famous? It caught the attention of the people who were behind The Office, and that's how she got hired onto The Office, by doing this free, fringe-style piece at the local festivals, the theater festivals in and around New York. So that's an amazing example of how she took that as truly a nobody, and she couldn't get hired, and she created her whole career from that. And I just think it's hilarious that it goes back to Matt and Ben. In doing this, I started with Emma Thompson, knowing that I would be, that's my first example of a female who writes her own stuff and how amazing she is. And then when I started to go through the other women, I realized how many of them were women of color. And then I realized, in many ways, that was the only way they were going to move their own careers forward, how powerful it was to take that step. And even in this case, Mindy has had issues because she talked about how she was treated in those early writer rooms and how she doesn't, of course, want that to happen to anybody else. So that, to me, was a big deal. She's now using the power she created to try to make it better for the people coming up after her, which is obviously something I'm all about. More recently, Molly Gordon, who can be seen on The Bear, has also written her own material. She co-wrote and co-directed. We don't think a lot about that co-directing thing, but people who come out of theater tend to do that more often. And even though the Directors Guild has an issue where they won't allow there to be more than one director on a movie, we're going to keep pushing at that, because slowly we're getting more and more co-directing things, whether it's the Russo brothers who are co-directing, right? You start thinking about boys have broken through that, and pretty soon women are going to do the same thing, because it doesn't need just one director. That's a rule I made up a long time ago. And often there's more than one. I remember when I read all about the making of The Lord of the Rings, there were days when Peter Jackson was tired, so Philippa Walsh did the directing, because, they're a team. She doesn't get her name on it as co-director, but she co-directed that movie, right? So why not? Because there's some dumb rules somebody put all those years ago. So Molly Gordon, because of her theater background, is doing that. Her most recent movie was Oh Hi, which just came out a few months ago from Sony. I think that's really cool. And she, again, said, I had to do this because nobody else was giving me the opportunity. So I knew that I had to do this for myself, which I think is really amazing. And until someone offers her better, more realistic characters, she's going to keep creating the ones on her own and building on that popularity and that success, which I think is really cool. She's got 3 movies coming up soon, which is pretty amazing for someone who's relatively young, and I think that's really cool. And then being in Australia, I was like, wait a minute, I have to talk about someone who we knew vaguely through some stuff from YouTube, and then Fisk came into Netflix, and we were talking about streaming earlier, the power of seeing in the United States. We used to never see anything from anywhere else in the world, which made me crazy because I knew there was other stuff out there. And so that is one of the benefits to me of streaming. We can now watch television and films that come from everywhere. And so Fisk came into our life. And when I worked her into the piece, this killed me. When she first pitched this show, she was told no, because the female character was unlikable. Tony Soprano killed people for a living, right? All right, the cop on the Shield killed people and sold drugs to other people as a cop. He was corrupt as hell, but somehow he was likable. I can name you a lot. Dexter killed people every week as a serial killer, and she just got told, well, you're kind of boring and you're not likable. And they weren't going to make the show, but she's smart. She wrote a book that put her own humor out to a larger audience, even though she was a known stand-up comic. And the power of the book brought her back into meetings where she repitched the show. And now they were like, oh, we get it. Okay, it'll work. But how much extra work she had to go through to make sure that they would let her do the character she had started with that they had said no to originally. I think that's really kind of fascinating. So I thought it was fun, wonderful to bring her in here. Not that I don't like these guys and their work. They're not hyphen dudes. They really aren't. All right? They don't act. You're never going to see that. They just direct. And directing is nice. But as Robert Riskin said many years ago to Frank Capra, he handed him 200 empty pages and said, put your touch on that. You cannot. Everything starts with a story. We all know that. Everything starts with a really good script. So, in my mind, we should be paying attention to the people who do a couple of things, if we're going to call them hyphens. Yay, thank you.